Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. We're really excited about Peggy G's talk today, but I'm also excited about seeing so many interesting names that I know coming in. So I'm hoping we're going to leave enough time at the end to have some discussion because there is an amazing amount of expertise in the virtual room here that'll be really fun to have some discussion, and including seeing Peter Whitehouse, one of our associated members coming in from the States. So it's lovely to see so many names here. So with no further ado, let me do Peggy's introduction. So Peggy is an affiliated researcher with us. She's doing a postdoc right now, and we're just with the School of, oh, I better get this straight. Peggy is a licensed landscape architect whose work focuses on research, knowledge mobilization, and use of evidence to inform the design and decision-making of aging environments. She completed a multi-phased mixed method investigation in 83 long-term care homes. You heard that right. That was the most ambitious study I've ever heard of for doctoral work. To help improve older adults' quality of life and healthcare workers' quality of work life. Evidence derived from the study serves to inform ongoing and upcoming redevelopments and new constructions of long-term care settings. So that knowledge mobilization piece is so key. This work was generously supported by the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council and Landscape Architecture Canada Foundation. Dr. Chi continues her work as a postdoctoral fellow at the Institute of Health Policy Management and Evaluation at the University of Toronto by integrating methodologies from landscape, architecture, health services research, dementia care mapping, and organizational management to transcend traditional disciplinary boundaries in research and practice. Her talk today is called Turning Over a New Leaf: the links between nature access and outcomes in long-term care. Welcome, Peggy. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Esme, for first inviting me and also for the lovely introduction. And thanks, Yulia, for facilitating this seminar series. And I guess I'll just get right into it and start my presentation. I see some familiar faces. Hi, Rodham. Hi, Francis. Okay, so let's share presentation. Are you seeing the presentation view, Yulia? Okay, all good?
Yes, works great.
Excellent. Okay, so let's get going. So good afternoon, everyone. As Meg said, my name is Peggy Chi. I'm very pleased to present to you my research entitled Turning Over a New Leaf: Links Between Nature Access and Outcomes in Long-Term Care. I do want to first thank my co-supervisors, Dr. Whitney Berta and Dr. Stephen Verteber, and also my committee members, Dr. Adrian Weg and Alicia Fulenchak at the University of Toronto and University of Alberta for kind of helping me see through my dissertation, which I completed early last year. So I'll first cover the context, followed by research questions, methods, results, and on some conclusions. Now, we know about the health concerns in nursing home sectors around older adults who live in nursing homes. And these health concerns extend to their care staff, such as personal support workers, healthcare aides, and nurses. The majority of residents has some form of dementia, cognitive impairment, and half of the residents exhibit depressive symptoms, responsive behaviors, low social engagement. Now, residents' needs place high demand on their care staff, leading to work-related stress. Work-related stress impact individuals in various ways, like feelings of stress, burnt out, and intention to quit. These experiences can impact their work and the organizations that they work for. Care staffs working in nursing homes experience higher work-related stress than those working in home care. Nursing home is not the same as home care, just to make sure that we're on the same page. It's not the same as home care, assisted living, supportive housing, or retirement homes. Nursing homes provides 24-hour nursing care. Outdated physical environments of nursing homes have been one of the neglected, long-standing challenges, which are inadequate for the people who both live and work there. Now, the COVID-19 pandemic underscored the impact of care environments on residents and care staff and exacerbated these existing problems. Although my study predates the pandemic has highlighted the need for this work. But there is hope. So research has shown that the physical environment can promote health. In nursing homes, the physical environment refers to three main components. The first one is the built environment, such as buildings and infrastructures made by humans. And then there is the natural environments that consist of elements like daylight, living plants, other living things which are not products of the human creation. And then you have the naturalized environment, which is a combination of both the built and the natural. My study focused on here, both the natural and naturalized environment. So in this presentation, when I refer to both, I will just use the term natural environment. Let's start with the definition of natural environments in healthcare. This is typically a human-made space that contains elements of nature. It is both indoors and outdoors, and it should afford familiarity for its users. It needs to be carefully designed with therapeutic goals with functions as resources for positive health. The natural environments can be a permanent space like gardens, courtyards, and farms, but they're really just commonly called the outdoors. The natural environment can also be a temporary experience derived from interventions. For example, increasing exposures to daylight and living plants, and usually these interventions only last maybe a few weeks or a few months. And what do we know about natural environments' impact on prevalent mental health and well-being outcomes that I mentioned before? We know that indoor gardening and outdoor agricultural activities has shown to improve social engagement. We know that the introduction of a new garden has shown to decrease antidepressant and antipsychotic intake. Meanwhile, the evidence for depression and responsive behavior has been mixed. We know very little about care staff, but they have reported their use of the natural environment to feel relaxed and to feel calm. While the research here showed promise, empirical work to date is limited and it focuses mostly on residents with very few studies on care staff. These studies show a mix of research rigor, which have also used unstandardized approaches to evaluating the natural environment. And there are varying ways of conceptualizing the natural environment in the literature. Now, all these arrows that you see point to the left because the conceptualization can contribute to the way that the natural environment is evaluated, which can also contribute to the way that the research is conducted relating to rigor. So my study aimed to address all these limitations. In spite of research limitations, there are also several well-developed models and theories that guided my studies. For example, there's this overarching model is the solitogenic model of health by Antonovsky, which asks what makes people healthy. It posits that there are these generalized and specific resources that we could use to manage life stressors. And if we manage it successfully, we move towards a state of positive health on a continuum that is bounded by sick at one end and healthy on the other. The confidence that we possess to acknowledge our resources and then mobilize them to manage the stressor is derived from our life experiences. And this here is called the sense of coherence. This overarching model encompasses other theories, which posits that the natural environment should be a resource for positive health. Another set of theories also posits that our relationship with the natural environment is derived from our life experiences. Now let's get into research questions. This combination of models, theories, and extant literature that I described, I used to help me guide my study. The aim of my investigation is to examine the relationship between the natural environment and the mental health and well-being of residents and care staff in nursing homes, using rigorously developed surveys to standardize an approach to the evaluation of natural environments in these settings. To look at this relationship, I first asked, what are the associations between natural environment and mental health and well-being in residents and care staff? So that was one research question. But before I could examine the associations, I had to also ask, how can the natural environment design, usage, and exposure be evaluated rigorously in nursing homes? And before I could answer that question, I had another research question I had to ask, which is, how is the natural environment conceptualized in healthcare literature? So as you can see, examining the association was the ultimate goal of my study, but research question 1 and 2 had to be addressed in sequence before 3. Now let's get into methods. I will provide an overview of how I conducted the study. This is a 3-phase cross-sectional mixed method study, and I did 1 phase for each question. For research question 1, I conceptualized the natural environment in healthcare setting by conducting a scoping review. Other settings beyond nursing homes were included to borrow the knowledge that we acquired from those settings. As a result, a conceptual framework was developed, which informed the next phase. In the second phase, I developed a new survey to evaluate the natural environment. This process included the assessment of relevant existing evaluation tools, modified Delphi technique, cognitive debriefing interviews, and principal component analysis. Sampling in this phase was conducted in a very methodologically rigorous fashion, and the process derived a parsimonious set of variables, which I used for phase 3, for research question 3. This set of variables were used to analyze their associations with outcomes using regression and multi-level modeling, and based on the preliminary analyses, the variables were separated into 2 groups. One group is the secure unit, and the other one is non-secure unit. And then I analyzed again. The phase produced models of relationship that were statistically significant. Now let's get into results. Remember, in research question 1, I asked, how is the natural environment conceptualized in healthcare literature? The natural environment in healthcare settings could be conceptualized and broadly interdependent themes, and these could be described as definitions, processes, usages, impacts, and opinions. So let's start here. Definitions. So you might recall that I have already defined the natural environment in the introduction, but leading into this, the way that we define the natural environment could heavily influence other themes like processes. Processes refer to the planning stage, like participatory design process, setting therapeutic goals. And during this time, stakeholders and multidisciplinary teams are involved to ensure that the needs of the residents and the staff will be met by the design. The decisions made during this process is critical because it could influence other themes like usages. Usages refer to the type of nature contact, frequency, accessibility, and then focusing on people's interactions with the natural environment. These interactions can influence other themes like impacts on health and work outcomes. Impacts of the natural environments refer to outcomes related to patients, residents, and staff in healthcare settings. And they have shown in the literature to be largely positive. Natural environment's impact can influence other themes like opinions. Opinions refer to perceptions, preferences, satisfactions relating to users' beliefs about the natural environment, which can in turn define and redefine the natural environment. Now, all these themes are interconnected and shaped by the physical and programmatic design of the natural environment. These designs refer to the physical components that are comprised in the natural environment and the program relating to these activities that deliberately use the natural environment for specific purposes in these healthcare settings. And highlighted in red here are the themes that were selected for the new survey in the next phase due to their practical applications for measuring natural environments to understand physical design, programmatic design, usage, opinions of the natural environment, and ultimately how these themes may impact the prevalent mental health and well-being in nursing homes. For research question 2, I asked, how can the natural environment design, usage, and exposure be evaluated rigorously in nursing homes? And to address this question, I developed the survey, which is called the Natural Environment Survey for Long-Term Care, which I refer to as the NESL. This survey is comprised of 3 parts. Part 1 evaluates the natural environment design. The variables here are organized by shared spaces of dining room, lounge, indoor plant space, and outdoor space. This part is completed by managers of residence program. Part 2 evaluates the usage of and exposures to the natural environment among residents. Variables here are about numbers of activities, indoor activities, and outdoor activities. This part is completed by recreational staff of each unit. And part 3, the last part, evaluates the usage of and exposures to the natural environments among care staff. And the variables here are separated by care staff's activities. This part is completed by the care staffs themselves individually. This survey was used to conduct primary data collection for the next phase. Now, lastly, we are getting to research question 3. As you recall, I asked, what are the associations between the natural environment and the mental health and well-being in residents and care staff? Now, this page is very overwhelming, I know. This is the research design model. It illustrates the abundance of variables that were examined for associations. Among these, those highlighted in red shows the variables that were part of statistically significant relationships. On the left, in the green box, are the independent variables about the natural environment. So these will be the variables from Nestle, the new survey that I created. In the middle, the blue box, are the dependent variables about residents and care staff. On the right, in the beige, are the control variables. In the next slide, I will focus only about reporting the significant relationships, starting with the resident's outcome. With the resident's outcome, we only found significant relationships in the secure units relating to residents' responsive behavior. And here are the key associations. There is less responsive behavior linked with unlocked doors to the outdoor space. Less responsive behavior is linked with more outdoor activities. Less responsive behavior is linked with less indoor activities. These findings are intuitive, such that more usage of and exposure to the natural environment outdoors is associated with better health outcome. While the directions of associations are yet to be confirmed in future studies, if the outcomes of these relationships were due to the effects of the natural environment, it is possible that the physical access to the natural environment is the most important salutogenic or health promoting design feature. Now let's look at the results for care staff. In here, it's separated in both insecure units and in non-secure units. Starting with secure units. Less emotional exhaustion and turnover in tension were reported when it's linked with more exposure and usage to natural environments during break time at school. At work, not school, at work. And more personal accomplishment or reportedly more sense of personal accomplishments were reported. And that's linked with more usage and exposure to the natural environment during leisure. In the non-secure unit, less stress at work was reported when it's linked with higher natural environment usage and exposure during breaks at work. Higher personal accomplishments were reported, which was linked with higher usage and exposure to natural environments during breaks, again, at work. All these associations here are, again, intuitive, such that higher usage of and exposures to natural environments do also relate with better outcomes in care staff. So if the outcomes of these relationships, again, were due to the effects of the NE, physical access in NE is the most important, sorry, when I say NE, I meant natural environment. So physical access to the natural environment is the most important design feature. And as you can see here, all the significant associations for both residents and care staff were linked to usage and exposure. So let's finish off with conclusion. And starting conclusion, I want to talk about some implications and future directions. So the conceptual framework, how could this be used? It could be used as a resource to help develop first a shared understanding of the natural environment during the design process. When you have a team of people in the same room, it is so important to get everyone on the same page and to make sure that your definition of the natural environment is the same. Now, for the future research here, I would like to further develop this framework using other approaches and new research to build on the work that I've done in my PhD. For the Nestle, this is the name of the new survey that I created. This could be used to assess the natural environment across nursing homes to compare design usage and exposure, and it would allow studies to be compared in future studies. And the future work relating to this instrument, I would like to add a fourth scale where it would allow me to evaluate the individual interactions of the natural environment among residents. And lastly, I want to talk about the associations. So with the caveat that the direction of the association is yet to be determined, these are the interventions that would be worth piloting to ascertain whether the relationships were due to sociogenic effects of the natural environment. So for example, for the residents, nursing home operators can unlock doors to the outdoor space and increase outdoor activities in spaces with high levels of natural environment. For the care staff, nursing home operators can increase natural environments usage and exposures during their breaks and provide easily accessible indoors and outdoor space with daylights and living plants, and also relocate some of these care delivery activities to the courtyard, to these outdoor spaces. And in future research, I would like to conduct longitudinal studies of these pilots to determine the direction of the associations. I would like to know and explore a deeper understanding of the relationship using qualitative methods like ethnography, dementia care mapping, and video-based observations. So I want to end off my presentation with 3 key messages. First key message is, if you build it, they will not come. In nursing homes, residents and care staff require deliberate, planned use of the natural environment. Key message number 2 is, visual access to the natural environment alone appears to be insufficient for health promoting salutogenic benefits in nursing homes. Key message number 3 is, physical access to an outdoor natural environments dedicated for use by residents and care staff is the most important design feature. The results from this study has potential utility for decision makers and researchers who are transforming nursing homes. While the study is set in Ontario, findings from this research are likely generalizable to nursing home settings in other jurisdictions. And here I'll finish off with a thank you page. This is a picture of my late grandmother working with a horticulturist. She was an avid gardener, and her relationship with the natural environment inspired me to produce a study in this topic. I want to thank the study participants and of course my supervisors at committee, and also to the funding agencies like SSHRC and Landscape Architect Canada Foundation. Thanks for listening, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Peggy. That's great. Do you want to just stop sharing and then we can pull up the gallery view?
Yes, of course.
That was fabulous, very interesting, and a little discouraging that they will not come if you just build it. You got to build more in. So let's, there's a couple of things. Yulia is just going to put into the chat the evaluation forms, which are very helpful for postdocs, because if they go on for jobs, they need to show that the people have actually appraised their presentations. So if you have a chance to fill up, that would be great. And Peter, I see your hand is up. Please just unmute and put your comment or question out.
Thank you so much. I have a question that contextualizes your work in the context that nature is changing. And by that I mean that the climate crisis is affecting, or should be affecting, our relationships to natural systems. And I wonder if, in general, the long-term care industry is preparing for that change, and whether you would, in your design features, think about that aspect. I mean, whether it's the fires in Quebec, which affected us here in Cleveland, or the floods in Toronto, which at one point had me evacuate from Baycrest's facility, the terraces where I was living. And let me make another comment. Long-term care is discouraging. It's kind of like the forgotten part of our healthcare system in many parts of the world. Is there a possibility that your work could help us think about our relationships to the long term and caring by helping long-term care be recognized as a place where we have a repository of human wisdom, disability as well, that can teach the rest of the community, which often forgets long-term care, how we need to relate to nature better? I apologize for such a complicated question.
Thank you so much, Peter, for your comment and all your questions. I guess I'll start from the top. So the first part of your question was about climate change and how that may impact long-term care homes in operation and really just the built space. So one thing that I could think immediately is, going into these sites. This was back in 2019 where I collected all the data over the course of the summer of 2019. There were already so much concern about overheating. And so, for example, in the dining room, most of the windows were, the shades and the curtains were all closed down because they're so afraid of overheating and the glare that would cause discomfort to the residents while they're dining. So, on one hand, I think it's really great that the operators of these homes are trying to make the spaces more comfortable for the residents. But on the other hand, I did find that a lot of these homes, they don't have time to reopen the curtains or pull up the shade when the residents are no longer dining. So what this meant was that for most part of the day, most of the residents are just in shade. So there is, an element of addressing overheating, but then the other side of the picture is that, well, we know there's a staffing crisis, right? So no one has time to actually open up the curtains. So there's that. And then I know that of recent research where they looked at mortality rates in long-term care homes, especially in homes where there are no air conditioning. So with the climate change conditions where we have high heat throughout the year. Today, for example, it's just very beautiful, but not typically during this time of the year we would have such beautiful weather. And so, for example, like these homes, they are not equipped to face the climate change. First of all, they're not equipped to face summer, and let alone climate change. So the mortality rates are going up because our temperatures are going up. And of course, as you mentioned, more needs to be done in these homes. Like there aren't many model homes out there. And hopefully you got from my presentation that it isn't always just about the physical spaces. Physical spaces needs to have a good program that helps it operate the right way. So it's the combination of operation and good design to allow people to enjoy the outdoor spaces when the temperature is, I guess, comfortable, and allowing people to use the outdoor space. And when I was collecting my data, I did find that there's such a risk-averse culture in long-term care. And so it meant that if it's too sunny, nobody goes outside. If it rains a little bit, no one goes outside. If it's a little too cold, no one goes outside. But the residents, what do they want? I think they want fresh air. They want to feel a bit of rain on their body. They want to feel a bit of sun on their skin. And in the very few homes that I do see that, there's unlocked doors and residents were able to kind of go outside more freely. Residents, like I've heard stories where residents would go and just take off their shirts and just bathe in the sun. And that is actually very infrequent scenarios in a lot of long-term care homes because most of these outdoor spaces are locked. So managers of residence program who I would walk around and do the design assessments with, sometimes they don't even know the passcode to get outside. So we would be locked out. And so they would go search for registered nurses who would have the keys or who would have the code to then actually get outside. Now, I think the second part of your question is what can we do to design changes, right? So if we use windows as an example, like I was talking with an architect the other day, and she looks into kind of sustainability and climate change in architecture. And one thing that I had mentioned to her is that, look at all these beautiful glass buildings that we're building where we could get a lot of daylight in rooms. And a lot of the long-term care homes that are building now do have a lot of glass windows. And on one hand, it is absolutely gorgeous to have all this daylight like just flooding into these rooms. But then on the other hand, that might be an issue few years down the road when climate change is just, it's increasing the temperature of our planet. Having all this glass is probably not the best idea. So what can we do? Could it be exterior louvers that kind of close up so that the heat doesn't even hit the glass window, creating a greenhouse effect? Could it be just more use of curtains? But even then, when the sunshine hits the glass, it kind of creates a greenhouse effect, right? Like, so you might have to kind of have a more exterior louver to prevent the sun from even hitting the glass, so that the interior space does not get overheated. And the mechanical systems in these long-term care homes are really the source of a lot of issues. So a lot of the homes could not open windows or cannot open windows further than a few inches, but also cannot open doors for fresh air because it will throw off their mechanical systems. They were so concerned about the mechanical system being thrown off that a couple of homes had their doors propped open during dining time, like during lunch, and they didn't want me to tell the authority that they propped the doors open for fresh air. So I feel like there's this kind of like tug and war between regulations, what they can or cannot do, and what residents really want in scenarios of comfort. And I talk about comfort because climate change directly relates to comfort. And so, there would be design changes to how we could better address the interior comfort level and exterior comfort level. And on a separate topic, I could talk about, the Saudi projects that I used to do as a landscape architect, where we actually had climate scientists take our landscape designs and throw it into these kind of, scientific models to then tell you what the temperature could be in these exterior courtyards or network of, outdoor environments, right? But I think that would be too much for today, but we could talk separately if you want to hear about that. Now, about knowledge repository, absolutely. And I think a lot of these older adults who live in long-term care homes know so much about their relationship with the natural environment and what they would prefer in these spaces. And I think oftentimes operationally and regulations can't, like, I don't want to say they don't listen to their needs, but I think there needs to be more attention on what the older adults want and need, their preferences. And in some of the more successful homes that I've seen, I'll leave with a really great example of a dementia outdoor space. So this outdoor space was designed in that they really understood each of the individuals who lived in the home area. So for example, many of these older adults were farmers. So because of that, in this courtyard that they had an old tractor. They had piles of hay and soil. They had a wheelbarrow. They had some shovels. They had a lot of gardening tools, right? Left there just for them to just, do some activities that they were used to, like shoveling hay and shoveling soil from one pile to another, tinkering with the tractor. There was another homes where when one older adults got admitted, I think they found out that he was a mechanic, and they had a spare room. So, or a carpenter. So they had a spare room, and they basically created this room into this woodworking shop. And he was the chair of a committee of woodworking, and the residents who were interested would then go on a meet up on a regular basis to do woodworking in this one room. So, to your point, understanding the residents and their preferences, their likes, their previous occupations could play a big role in supporting their quality of life in long-term care. That was a really long answer. I am so sorry. Esme, I can't hear you.
Sorry, I was going to say that was great because Peter lobbed you 3 balls and you caught them all. Well done. So there's a bunch of questions in the chat, and I thought I would just highlight some of those, but they've just disappeared. Oh, there we go. Okay. So maybe a little bit shorter answers because there's quite a few of them, and people can also put up their hand, but let me just get through this first. Are there particular items suggested in the natural environment, for example, types of plants or things that you think are really healthy to have in the space?
Good question. Let's see. Let me think about this. So healthy to have types of plants. So there are some things I could think of. With regards to what plants to use, it's important to have plants that the older adults are familiar with. So plants that they grew up with. None of these tropical monsteras or succulents that are so fashionable these days, but simple things that they would have grown up with, like maybe daisies or marigolds, and native plants, right, that you would find in your local nurseries. So native plants are really important to the biodiversity. Putting on my landscape hat now on is that like native plants are really good for biodiversity, right? And instead of using invasive kind of non-native plants. So that would be both good for the environment, but also good for kind of recollection of memories for the older adults who would be interacting with the natural environment. Typically, they would, let's say you plant an edible garden, right, with tomatoes, herbs like basils, etc. There's usually a story that would come with interacting with these kind of vegetable gardens. And that would also help them to get outside. That would be a motivation, an incentive for them to get outdoors. And then also healthy to have. So what would be healthy to have? So definitely edible gardens. I'm all for, edible gardens because you can eat them. So staff would not be hesitant to let residents interact with the plants because they're not afraid of, poison or toxic plants, right? That they may eat. And then lastly, I would say that plants that have different type of looks during seasons. So if you look at very contemporary type of landscape or, courtyard spaces, there's usually lots of grasses and tall grasses, etc., right? And oftentimes, or just kind of like only few species. And that's, in my opinion, not great because during the winter time, usually you just have one look and it's very flat, right? And all the grasses are dead. The short and tall grasses are dead. There isn't really kind of interest in the way the garden will look. But if you have a horticulturist that kind of help you understand the blooming seasons, so some of the flowers would bloom during different months of the year, right? And some plants, edible plants like kale or cabbage, for example, will last you well into October. So that when you get well into the fall, you would still have plants out there to look at or to touch, right? And so, so it helps you, this kind of biodiverse planting plan would help you kind of stretch the interest of these outdoor spaces longer. I'll stop right there.
All right, super. So we have a bunch of questions about getting access to the outdoor space. So there's one on any suggestions for convincing Ministry of Long-Term Care with regards to access to the outdoors, keeping doors unlocked to secure outdoor spaces. We're currently doing a retrofit and haven't finalized our outdoor space. And then great work, Peggy. It's nice to have some high quality research showing a reduction in responsive behaviors of residents living in secure spaces when doors are unlocked. My question, did your study look into accessibility issues to accessing the outdoor? For example, residents can't physically open doors because they're heavy, negotiate the doors with a mobility aid. As you mentioned, staffing often is a barrier in terms of accessing outdoor space, even if they're secure. All right, your comment about risk is what we always hear from the homes. You cannot keep it unlocked or they cannot go out on their own. The home needs to include outdoor space as part of their living space. All right. So there's a couple of really, let's stop with that. So let's just talk about how do we get people outdoors? How do we get permission to take them outdoors? How do you make it so it's, even if you have permission, they can get in and out? You know, all of those types of questions.
Right. These are all such important questions. So starting with the first one, how do we convince the ministry? Well, if anybody has connections to the ministry, get me to talk to them. I would love to give them this presentation and talk more about, the evidence-based design around outdoor spaces, right? So that we could make some changes to the operations and to the regulations. And if we look at the design guideline that, in my view, is so dated now, it's the most recent one is 2015. And when I look into it, they talk about residents having a view to the outdoors when they are lying in bed. Okay, well, that's good. But if you recall, my key message number 2 is that just having views outdoors is insufficient. We really need to get people outside. So there aren't really any type of regulations around needing outdoor time. So for example, in childcare services, there is regulations that kids need to be outside for 1 hour, at least 1 hour in the morning and 1 hour in the afternoon. Well, why isn't there something like that for long-term care homes? And, like letting people outside, like we live in such a, pathogenic, risk-averse world, and the biomedical models that kind of guides long-term care home operations, that's the way that they approach it, right? But let's talk about a bit of dignity and risk. So to take a little bit risk to go outside to get fresh air, there's dignity in that, right? And if we talk about risk in falling, right? A lot of times where staff or home operators do not want residents to go outside very much because they're afraid of falls. I understand that, and that is so important to prevent residents from falling. However, we also know that most of the falls happen in the bathroom, in their bedrooms. So do we take those spaces away as well? Right? We can't take those spaces away. So why are we taking the enjoyment of going outdoors away from them just because there's a bit of risk? Access issues, accessibility issues. Yes. So in my data collection using the Nestle survey that I created, I did look at how do people get outside, largely at things like threshold. So when I talk about threshold, if you can think about like a door frame, right? You cross from the inside to the outside, there's usually a door frame that is on the ground. And usually there is a little bit of a lip, or there's like something that you actually have to cross. So for older adults, oftentimes in long-term care homes, they are using a walker, they're using a cane, or they're using wheelchairs. Having that threshold there is a big barrier to access, but they are there. Unless this is a door that is kind of like a main access, like, so in some homes, their outdoor access is, getting down the elevator and then going out the main door, like main entrance, right? Going into the foyer and then main entrance. Usually those doors have flat thresholds. So meaning there is no barrier to access, to cross between the inside and outside. When we talk about accessibility, well, in these monsters homes that they're building these days, like I'm talking about 300, 400 beds and upwards, right? These cannot be 1 or 2 levels. These are multi-level units. So for someone whose room or whose home area is on the 6th floor, think about this. You're going to have to leave your room, ask for assistance, and ask for permission if you're in the dementia care unit, to then take an elevator to go down 6 floors, come out of the elevator. Hopefully that elevator takes you directly into the foyer where there is a door that takes you directly to a courtyard, but that's usually not the case. So every step of the way is a barrier when we talk about accessibility. In some of the homes that are a bit better, they're able to, there's this one home that I think had maybe 3 levels or something. And every level, they introduced kind of like a rooftop terrace, which I thought was brilliant. So if you're on the 3rd floor, you have a direct access to this rooftop terrace. And I was just so impressed by what they were able to do in this terrace. They had, like edible garden, they had some, of course, the typical flowers, and then they had a patch of grass, which I thought was a bit silly on a rooftop garden. But their rationale was that some of these men like to mow the grass, likes to mow the lawn. So that was some of the activities that they would do. If Mr. Smith says, I want to go out and mow the lawn, then they let him go out and mow the lawn. And if Mrs. Smith says, I want to go and weed and like pick out the weeds or pick the flowers. And there was actually in one home where the residents in the home area got so mad at this one resident because she loved picking the flowers, but she would pick them all. And then there was no more flowers to enjoy in the courtyard, right? But it's so great to hear that people are actually actively using these spaces as they should. Now, when it comes to staffing assistance, yes, there's, lots of problem with low staffing, low retention, turnover rates, etc. Right? This is such a big issue. In some of the more successful homes that I saw, they were so engaged with their community, so external to the long-term care homes. Like they were so engaged with their adjacent community. So if they're in a region, they've expanded their connections to schools, to universities, to the people outside to get them to come in. Like one home I think on a monthly basis during like summer month, they would host a farmer's market and they invite everybody in the community and extended community to come to this farmer's market. It was just so brilliant. And all the recreational activities that they would do in the home areas would be building up to that moment, right? So if they pick some fruits outside, or if they pick tomatoes outside, that it is going towards their salad tomorrow or later that day, right? Or if they're picking vegetables, they're going to clean it, refrigerate it, and that will be for the end of the week for the farmers market sales. So these older adults who are living in these homes had a purpose, right? They had a purpose, meaningful activities in these spaces, and that was found to be incredibly important. And lastly, someone had mentioned that we need to include the outdoor space as living space. And I couldn't agree with you more. Why are we not using these outdoor spaces when they could be another living room? Why does it have to be this clear definition between outdoors and indoors? Like during, spring, summer, and fall in our own homes, how often do we go to the porch and how often do we go to your yard? We see it as an extended part of our home. But somehow in long-term care homes, it is so separate. The line is so thick and dark, and it's just drawn there. You cannot cross it. But in some of the homes, like when I spoke with the care staff, many of them would say like, yes, we wish we had more time to take them out there. With the budget cuts and staffing shortage, we really just don't have time to take them outside. And for some of them, they would integrate their care delivery in outdoor spaces only when the residents are exhibiting some sort of responsive behavior and they couldn't calm them down. And so they have said that the best way is to just take them outside, spend some time with them outside in the fresh air, and immediately any type of responsive behavior issues that they were having indoors went away. So
Right.
that, these are directly from care experiences, and we need to listen to that. We need to listen to, delivering care in outdoor space will also make the care staff's lives easier, right? If you have less responsive behaviors indoors or outdoors, then that means the care staff could spend more time actually connecting with the residents or doing other tasks.
All right.
I'll stop it right there.
So let me share some of the FYI wonderful resources that people have been sharing. So there was a discussion about balconies. They're required by the Ministry of Long-Term Care manual, but there's no minimum requirement of size. And then many homes have balcony risk assessments and the residents fail and they're not allowed to access the space.
Yes.
So another issue is the outdated manual where balconies should be common practice, not recommendations. And your comments on your commenting is that it was a great idea to extend to community engagements and the farmer market ideas. And the families need to be continued to involved in activities for elders. Let's get Peggy on CP24 and other places to get minds thinking, speaking out, which I thumbs up for that one for sure. Also the vertical homes, everything being located on the first floor is problematic. And in most new long-term care homes, the clients actually can't leave the floor. So if they don't have space on that floor, there's a problem. And I wonder if we can connect with long-term care homes, life enrichment programs, recreation managers to show this presentation to help to encourage including more outside activities as part of their scheduled programming. Similarly, the idea about risk assessment and respect for people's issues balance is similar to the risky play and children's safety issues. Rodham talks about the idea about heat gain through the windows, and some of these problems may be solved through building automation systems that are becoming more common with a specific type of glass that changes its opacity. Whether it's opaque or not, I don't know how to say opacity. Opacity, thanks. In response to the input and sensors measuring light levels. And then ideas about changing the culture and operations are important points. We can build the outdoor environmental space when designing or renovating, but they won't be accessed without alignment. This includes addressing psychological health and safety so that the staff feel safe to speak up about opening the door. And there's a question with the 3 minutes left. Oh, there's also Rebecca Churchyard, one of our Institute graduates, was one of the founders of
Hi, Rebecca.
And that's the mission, is to help people have green space and do therapeutic gardening. So that's a real vision that's come to fruition and worth checking it out in Milton. And there's a comment about the fact that the circadian rhythms and sleep-wake cycles, the help with light is much better if you're outdoors rather than indoors behind windows. And I think I'll finish with your next research plans.
Did you want me to talk to some of those points?
I'm conscious that we only have 4 minutes left. So
Okay, so
whatever
I
you
will
want, whatever you want to do with your 4 minutes, go for it.
absolutely. So with the balcony, I love that you talked about the balcony. So many homes these days have balconies because they're, well, vertical homes now, right? And you're right, there are no size requirements. And I know in, architecture design, they're testing out various different ways to keep the residents safe while using the balconies. And some of the designs are more successful than others, and the others that do fail, then it makes the balcony unsafe and everything's locked up and no one gets to go out unless the balcony gets fixed, and then it takes a really long time to get the balcony fixed. So that was a couple of my sites as well, to see that. And with regards to recreational managers, they are by far one of my favorite people in the operation team. They were so on board. The managers of residence program and recreation, and especially the folks who were trained as what are they called, like therapeutic recreationalist or something like that, like TRO. They're wonderful. You're right. I should reach out to them and actually have a presentation at their organization, at their association. But all the folks who are trained as TROs are just phenomenal. Like they believe in everything that we've been discussing in this session. But again, there's only so much they could do as managers within this kind of umbrella of care operation, right? Where there's lots of regulations, there are things that they need to do and they cannot do. So as much as they're enthusiastic about getting residents outdoors, there are also limitations to, I guess, to the rules. And if anybody knows people at CP24, any news outlet, connect with me directly, or collect through Esme, and yeah, let's get this news out. I'm all about that. And another note, I knew Rodham would jump in and help me out with the architectural design about windows and censoring light intensity. There are so much great architectural design / architectural technologies that could be done to help with this. I think it would just be, having like a really important discussion between the clients being the care operators, right? And the architects to explore all these options and invest in a long-term solution, not just a solution for today, this year, or in 5 years, but acknowledging that there is a climate change crisis that we will be facing in decades, right? So planning ahead will save so much money and so much frustration and issues that we potentially face down the road. And I'm so glad that someone mentioned Rebecca. She's a dear friend of mine, and she actually was just talking at one of my one of my seminar series. So I do knowledge mobilization activities now as a postdoc, as one of my activities, and she was just speaking on. She was speaking at one of the seminars in January, and I absolutely love what she's doing with Green Care Farm, and it's so important getting older adults outdoors. And I will end off by saying that changing culture is, I think, one of the most important things. And I think to change culture is very difficult. And I think largely this is why I am doing a lot of knowledge mobilization activities. I'm speaking wherever people want me to speak. I'm happy to, because it takes everybody to get on board to make something like this happen, to make access to outdoors and long-term care important. And I'll end off with a quick story that I've heard of landscape architects that are pioneers of landscape architecture, living in long-term care homes, and the last few months of his life not getting access to go outside. We can't have that anymore. I think it's so important that we need to go back to connecting with nature and not be so risk averse to our care delivery, because long-term care homes are people's living spaces. If you live in your house or your condo and you have somebody there telling you what you can and cannot do, or whether you can or cannot go outside, well, that's not really a quality of life that you're having, right? So yeah, there's definitely an important need to rethink the way we approach care delivery in long-term care homes, and also, the culture needs to change.
Well, thank you for a great presentation. Obviously, fantastic discussion. There's people saying, I'm going to help you spread the word. Francis is sending you a link at the Toronto Star. So please, let's keep this momentum going. And you can either reach out to Peggy or you can reach out to me and I'll connect you with Peggy either way. So thank you everyone for attending and for participating. And we've got people from coast to coast. I see people from Joanne from Nova Scotia, and we have people from BC. So the word's getting out there, and please call on her. Peggy will come and talk to your group and try to inspire them as she's inspired us. Thanks so much, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.